Hey guys, I was wondering if you guys know the difference between a poorly dressed man on a tricycle and a well-dressed man on a bicycle. The answer? Attire. So, there it is, as always, my amazing joke. But now we get back to U.S. history. So today's emphasis is going to be on soldiers in the war and how they were able to get so many people to volunteer, and then more specifically African Americans and women and how they were going to help out in the war effort. So first we're going to talk about selective service. Now this is something that still is around today, and it's also important to keep in mind that we're still in the middle of this progressive era where people are not just doing the same old thing time and time again. It's starting to be more a little bit philosophical, a little bit more thought behind different things before they're going to be done. So the first thing that the country needs to do, and I know we've talked a lot about mobilizing the workforce and helping out on the home front, but all of that, it can't be done if we don't have soldiers to fight in the war. So we'll first start by talking about the draft. So as it says on here, when the United States enters the war, the Army and the National Guard combined have just about 300,000 troops. Now, you cannot win a war with only 300,000 troops in one branch of the military compared to what is going on in the entire war. So what do? You know, the thought is, and we talked about the 4-Minute Man in the last video, how they're trying to get people to go and volunteer. You know, we think of like Uncle Sam. We're not yet to the point where we have the Uncle Sam, and you can probably think of the, you know, we want you, and he's pointing his finger. But he's still going to be used as propaganda. But anyways, we need to figure out how to get people into the war. So the government, and with support of Congress and President Wilson, they institute the draft. And a lot of people think that this is unconstitutional, forcing someone to fight in a war, fight in a conflict, but they're going to figure out a legal way to do this. So Congress in 1917, they passed the Selective Service Act of 1917. And what this does, it requires all men between the ages of 21 and 30 to register for the draft. And after you register, then you get sent out to these local draft boards. It used to be done by the national government, but progressives thought that was wrong, to have the entire federal government do this. So the progressives in Congress kind of break it up into different military districts and little kind of local community districts to get people to sign up for the draft, and then those people in those communities are then going to be the ones deciding who does get drafted, because the federal government doesn't know what the town needs. They don't know who it should be exempted, whether it's people who work for farming or teachers or in a plant or factory, something like that. So they leave it up to the local boards, and this was something that the communities they resisted at first, because it was kind of controversial in the sense of you're picking people to go to war, but you're also picking who gets to stay home. But in the end, about 2.8 million Americans are going to be drafted, and the Selective Service is going to be successful because of that. And even though we just ended with the 2.8 million people that were drafted, I think it's also important to know how many people volunteered. In total, about 2 million Americans sign up and volunteer for the draft. Volunteer for the military. And with that, again, it was for various reasons. Some people had heard about like the German atrocities. Some people had heard war stories growing up about the Civil War and the Spanish-American War, and they felt it was their duty to also partake in this global conflict. You also had people who thought democracy was on the way out in the United States. Again, there's kind of a fear of communism at this point, which is going to be coming a little bit more later, but still kind of the idea of communism in the United States. But the Selective Service and people volunteering in total is going to be about 5 million people trying to join the war and join the conflict. Now talking about African Americans in the war. Now, in total, about 400,000 African Americans were drafted, and 42,000 were sent overseas to fight in the conflict. And I know there's kind of a big discrepancy between the 42,000 that were actually went overseas versus the 400,000 that were drafted. And a big part of that is really a major negative on the U.S. government and the military. But African American soldiers, once they were in the Army, they encountered discrimination and prejudice. And this is one thing I can't understand some of the negatives and why people were treated so poorly, and they would get less pay, they would get leftover uniforms, they would be told what to do by white officers who were clearly racist. But here you have people who are volunteering and people who are trying to fight in the war, but they're being racially discriminated against. People who are trying to help out the country. And yet they still are treated with such utter disrespect. Now, one country that I'll say that was not disrespectful, they were the French. In the United States, they basically split them up into two segregated groups. And those were the 92nd and the 93rd Infantry Division. Now, again, they were very segregated. They were given very, very poor conditions. Now, there was also another group known as the 369th Infantry Division, and they are known today as the Harlem Hellfighters. Now, because of so much discrimination, oftentimes white soldiers said that they would not allow African Americans to fight alongside them. And again, to me, these people are willing and able to fight in the war, and they're being discriminated against. So the French, they do not discriminate whatsoever. So they allow African Americans to serve alongside them and join in their ranks. So they give the entire 369th Infantry Division something known as the Croix de Guerre, which that is a very, very distinct honor that is given to them by the French government. It's only for foreigners who help out during a war. But African Americans, again, we talked about the Great Migration, but they are going to help out a ton in the military and unfortunately face a lot of discrimination and prejudice and racism and receive really a lack of respect during the conflict. And then lastly, we have women in the military. So again, we talked about women, how they were able to mobilize with the workforce, they were able to make more money, and when the war was over, unfortunately a lot of women lost their job, but it did help out for the future. Now, women are also going to help out in the military, and this was something that was done in a lot of other wars. Think about like the Civil War, helping out with nursing and things like that. But World War I is the first time in which women are able to officially serve in the armed forces. And the Navy is going to be the first group to do this and the first group to allow this. And they do this because there's a shortage of male volunteers. And a lot of times when men were drafted or they volunteered, if they could not pick what their job was, they were automatically told that they can go and serve and fight on the front lines. Now, the Navy allows women to join the war, but not fight on the front lines. They're not allowed in combat roles. So they are going to serve as yeomen, which is their official title. And that's going to be a lot of clerical work, but it's also going to be like electricians and people who are chemists and photographers and people who are going to start working in pharmacy and things like that. So the Navy is going to create this job, and women are officially able to help out. And in the Navy, that's going to be about 11,000 women. In the Army, about 20,000 women are going to join the Army Nursing Corps. So this is, again, the first time where women are authorized to serve in the ranks. Now, the Army Nursing Corps sends about 10,000 women overseas to go and fight in the conflict. And as you can guess, just based on the name, it was mostly going to be in the capacity of they're helping out in the battlefields. They were nurses. And with that, I think it's also important to note that many women also died in the war. Just because they were told that they could not have a combat role didn't mean that they couldn't go near the battlefields. They were right there in the thick of it. They were there making sure that people got supplies that they needed, that they got medical attention. They were trying to save people's lives, and unfortunately a lot of women were caught in the crossfire. But it's also, again, important to note just how influential this mass migration and mass assistance by women and African Americans and everyone helping out in the home front and helping out in the war is going to help the United States earn a victory.